Hey guys, Brian Castro from Better Chess Training here, and today I would like to share a game with you that I studied recently, and um, this is a game between two Greek masters, Christodoulou, who is white here. He's a FIDE master, rated about 2300, against Evstratios Grivas, who is a grandmaster, rated about 2500. And I know he is a fairly prolific chess author, so you may be familiar with him. But in any case, he's playing the black pieces today. And in this video, I'm going to kind of go fairly quickly through the opening moves because I think a lot of the instructive content is in the middle game and end game. So why don't we get going here? E4, E6, D4, D5, the French defense. And white plays knight to D2, which is the Tarrasch treatment of the French. And then black plays knight or D takes E4, which is the Rubinstein defense, which could be played against three knight C3 as well as knight to D2 or knight to D2. So knight takes E4, knight to D7, knight to F3, and knight G to F6. This is all very standard. Bishop to D3. Now sometimes, just a quick note here, sometimes knight takes F6 check, and knight takes F6, and then bishop to D3 can be played that way, but as we'll see here, it actually transposes. Knight takes E4, bishop takes E4, knight to F6, and then bishop to D3. So that goes back to that position. And here's the key move in this particular opening, and it is C5. And if D takes C5, bishop takes C5, helps black's development along and gives him some freedom here with his pieces and in an even position. But white here instead castles, which is also fairly standard. And then we have C takes D4, knight takes D4, and then bishop to C5. So one of the things that we're going to notice in this game is how um, the use of how we can gain time for our pieces, I guess is the best way to say it. And usually by ways of making some type of forcing threat against our opponent and then using the time that they take to respond to that to be able to do something else. So in a way, we gain a tempo to do more than one thing per turn, I guess you could say, or accomplish more than one goal per turn. So pay attention to that over the next few moves and throughout this game. So that's one of the nuances or one of the concepts I want you to kind of observe here. Okay, knight to b3, attacking this bishop, and then the bishop goes to e7. Okay, queen to e2, and then we castle. Black castles here, makes a lot of sense. So we can see here that there's not a ton of tension in the center. This opening is not, we're not going to have a lot of tactical fireworks, perhaps, at least not with um, pawn moves or whatnot. We're going to have to, black and white will have to outplay each other with their pieces, and we're going to see that throughout this game here. Bishop to g5, and then queen to c7. I do want you to know. I do want to make a quick note of something here. Is that in this particular opening, the white bishop is often developed to b7 here via b6, but it doesn't work in this specific position tactically because if we play bishop to b6 here, and if you want, you can pause it if you want and see if you can find the problem with that. And I'll give you a couple seconds before I continue. So the problem with b6 in this position is that after bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, white has the deadly queen to e4 with a double attack on h7 as well as the rook on a8. So black avoids that, of course, and plays queen to c7, and white plays c3. Bishop to d7. So now, since black really can't play b6 in this position, he's going to develop his bishop via d7. Okay, rook a to d1 and rook f to d8. fairly logical, taking the open files and then contesting the open file. Okay, rook f to e1, and now black plays h6. Okay, and this is a subtle move, or not really a big move, but it is an important one because white or black is basically wants white to show his cards. Okay, and by position, showing where he's going to position his bishop, because there's a big difference if the bishop were to say go back to something like d2, okay, and maybe or even c1, and then plan on redeveloping or redeploying along this diagonal. Okay, instead, white plays back to h4. Okay, which even though seems like a small difference, it basically is showing that it's going to be coming back along this diagonal with g3. So now black can maneuver and plan around that, and he does so with queen to f4. Okay, obviously threatening this bishop, but white, of course, is not going to allow him to take the bishop. But so after bishop to g3, the purpose of queen to f4 now is evident after queen to a4. Okay, and here we're hitting this pawn on a2, and again, or something to be said about this is that we don't need to worry necessarily. Black is going to have a hard time winning this pawn outright from this position, but it forces white to deal with it. Okay, so it gives him something to worry about. Okay, and it's going to be it's a little bit annoying. So he goes back and plays bishop to b1. Okay, and again, this theme of being able to develop pieces to be able to complete your objectives faster and gain time is evident with black's next move, which is bishop to b5. Attacking this queen, again, there's no intention of, there's no tactic like a skewer tactic or anything where this queen is going to be lost, okay? But we'll see here after queen to c2 that black is able to play here to c4. And we can see here it's indirectly attacking a2 as well. So material is even here. The position is about even. But we can see here that black has these slight nuances, these slight little advantages that are accumulating positionally, and then we'll see how that works throughout the game. Okay, black plays bishop to e5, and now this introduces a tactical theme here of a removal of the guard, where he could take the knight on f6, and then the queen could go to h7 with check. Okay, in this particular case, there's not an immediate checkmate, but there is that threat of that dynamic in there. So what black plays here next is rook takes d1. Okay, so he's basically initiating an exchange of rooks here. Rook takes d8, and then bishop takes d8. I think he's got a subtle reason for this, and we'll come back to it in a minute, but you'll see what I mean momentarily. Knight to d4. Okay, and here it doesn't look like much. He's attempting to trade queens here. The position is fairly even, but there's a couple. Black has a very good move here, and if we continue on with our this concept I've been kind of teasing you with using threats in order to gain time for our pieces, maybe you can guess what the next move is. If you want, you can just pause the video for a minute and see if you can guess. Okay, well, black isn't interested in trading queens here. Instead, he plays queen to a5. Okay, and what is the idea here? Well, let's take a move back here. With queen to on a4 here, of course he's being attacked by the queen, so he cannot keep this queen in this position. Okay, and we can see the bishop is the only thing attacking the a pawn, or defending the a pawn, while we have two attackers. So we can win this if we have the time to do so. We can't do it right away, of course, because then we'll lose our queen. However, with queen to a5, Well, now black has, or white has something that he has to worry about, which is obviously losing this bishop. Okay, so for example, if he plays knight to f3, which would be a normal, actually it would seem like a nice normal move protecting this bishop, well then we now can win this a pawn. Okay, one thing to note here is that this type of maneuver would be a little more dangerous if the rooks were still on the board, because of potential pins along the A file and that type of thing. In this position, again, I'm speaking more conceptually. Sometimes it's not a very wise thing to try to hunt for these A pawns and H pawns in these positions because of those types of possibilities. So that could have been on Grivas's mind when he decided to trade off those rooks. At the very least, let's go back to the position. At the very least, it kind of helps him to not have to worry about calculating those trades of the rooks. So I thought that was a good decision. Also, okay, so we're attacking. So it's White's turn to play here. So instead of retreating, which would immediately probably lose the a pawn, he takes here with f6, or bishop takes f6. Okay, and after bishop takes f6, we now see again the position materially is about even, but black has a positional advantage here of the two bishops. Okay, and if you've been playing chess for a little while, you've probably heard of this or maybe experienced it yourself. When you have both bishops and your opponent only has one or none or no bishops, then in certain positions, specifically open positions where there are not a lot of pawns obstructing the middle of the board, this could be quite an advantage. And so here we're going to see that in play here. And so this is the next major concept I want you to major strategic theme that I want you to observe during this game, which is the use of the two bishops. Okay, queen to h7 check. So we knew this was happening, but in this case, and as we saw again, and this again is one of the reasons why it was a good idea to trade these rooks. There is no real threat to the king being checkmated here or anywhere. King to f8, queen to h8 check, and king to e7. Actually, there is one thing I wanted to show you, and we're just going to go back real quick to that position before we traded rooks. As I was analyzing it, I found an interesting combination. I thought to myself, well, couldn't I just retreat this here and maybe this would give the bishop more scope and maybe go back to c6? But there is a tactical shot here. And again, if you want to pause it and see if you can find it, it might be a good exercise for you. And I'll let you do that. Okay, well, the move here is bishop takes, or rook takes d5. Okay, and I'm going to show you what happens. If we take back with the rook, we now have bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and then queen takes h7, queen to h7 check, king to f8, and now queen to h8 check with the skewer. And so after king to e7, queen takes a8, wins the rook. Okay, if we go back and we take with the pawn instead, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now queen to h7 check, king to f8, and now queen to h8 is mate, because this rook is now covering the e8 square. So hopefully, I'm hoping this analysis will show you why trading those rooks several moves previous was a good decision, even though it may not have been apparent. You know, he may not have realized all of this stuff was going to happen at this time here. But let's go back to the game. So after knight to d4, queen to a5, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen to h7 check, king to f8, queen to h8 check, and then king to e7. I think that's where we left off. So white here plays queen to c8. So he's threatening to take this pawn here with check, and black, as well as this bishop here on c4. So black solves both problems by retreating the bishop to d5. And just a quick note here, we cannot play something like c4 here with the idea of trading the knight for the bishop because of queen to e1 is checkmate. Okay, so after bishop to d5, knight to b3, you're attacking the queen. And the queen has a nice position here, covering the c5 square, which is a check for this queen, and the c7 square. So he wants to maintain that, so queen to b6 is the move to make. Queen to c5 check. Here, white decides to enter into an endgame, or at least offer that, and um, black says that's fine with me, with queen takes c5, knight takes c5, okay? So let's take a look before we move on just at this position in general. Again, material is even, and if the minor pieces were not on the board, if the bishops and the knight were not on the board, this would probably be a draw, okay? Because white has a queenside majority, black has his kingside majority, and the king positions are fairly equivalent. Of course, I'm not totally sure about that. Obviously, it depends also on the endgame skill of the players. But in general, this type of pawn structure, if there were no minor pieces on the board, would be fairly drawish, or would more depend on the king position. But in this case, because black has these two bishops, we're going to see that he can maneuver around the board or threaten more on the board than white can. And we're going to see in these coming moves just the difficulty that white has in generating any counterplay here. So b6 is played, pushing this knight back. Okay, knight to e4. If he were to move, say something like here to b3, then I think that it's not. We just keep moving in with the king here, or could maybe even threaten something like a5 instead as well. But not a big thing to worry about here. Okay, knight to e4, and then bishop to e5. Okay, so if we go back here, the knight is threatening this bishop, and we have no interest in trading this knight for one of our bishops. Okay, so that's one of the things you want to remember. When you have the two bishops in a position that is conducive to the two bishops, you want to keep them on the board and use them to make more threats, or maybe convert it into some type of material advantage. Okay, bishop to e5, and then g3. So g3 is played so that we can move this king, okay, because otherwise it would have to protect the h-pawn. Okay, um, now black plays g5, and just as a note, I was thinking f5 would have been good, and then knight to d2, and then g5, but it actually transposes in the game. g5, and we'll see in a second what the idea is here. But in general, it's good to advance your majority, your pawn majority here, and start moving it towards creating a passed pawn, and eventually, obviously, promoting. And obviously, white's going to try to do the same in general with his majority. And that's what you do in the endgame, typically, with your pawns. Okay, king to f1, another endgame principle of trying to centralize and activate your king and get it into the game in the endgame. Okay, f5 is played. So here we see we're just advancing our pawns. We're pushing this knight back. This knight is losing squares to go to, or places he can go. Now I've actually made a little note here. Now we'll notice here that white would like to play these pawns forward, but because of the positioning here, we see now the purpose of g5. And if you want, try to guess what black plays next here. Black plays g4. We can see now it totally shuts down the kingside pawns of white. King to e2 is played, and he's trying to activate his king some more. h5, and now c4. Okay, so typically when we have, again, pawn majorities, one of the first pawns advanced would be the one that is on the open file, I guess you could say, or the one that will create a passed pawn. And that makes a lot of sense. Let me just show you something. And this doesn't have anything to do, so just ignore that this pawn is hanging. If white were to play b4, okay, and again, ignore that this pawn is hanging, then the typical move would be to play something like b5, which keeps this pawn from advancing. Okay, so that's why in this case you advance the pawn that's on the open file here when you have a majority. Okay, bishop to b7. Again, not a big deal here. And this bishop can, of course, come around if he wants to, but in general is very well placed along this diagonal. b4. Okay, by the way, yeah, so this pawn was being attacked, but of course, he also wants to, again, advance c5 here and maybe create a pass pawn. That's the long-term principle, or the general principle of pawn majorities. Okay, and now, great move here. Bishop to c3. And here we see we're attacking this pawn and this. And again, white can easily defend this by moving it or defending it here, but that is exactly what black wants, because now we have this hole here on c5, which we can use later. Okay, bishop to d4. Of course, that's only, we want to just protect this, perhaps. Okay, as well as it's a good diagonal. We're keeping an eye on this f2 pawn. Okay, knight to b3, and now obviously we're not going to let our bishop get taken. We can move the bishop elsewhere, but black gets in a move in between here, and it's an important. This is the perfect timing for this, and again goes back to our theme of gaining time by making threats. And we play bishop to f3 check. Okay, and besides. In and of itself, checking the king doesn't mean much, but in this case, because this bishop is attacking the f2 pawn, the white king cannot advance. He has to move back and stay close to this pawn if he doesn't want to lose it. Okay, so king to f1 and bishop to c3. Okay, so these bishops are, so he just gets it out of the way, but it's also restricting this king. This king is no longer a factor in the center or the queen side. Okay, well, white pushes on. He's trying to create some counterplay here with c5. Okay, after c5, black, again, can take this. I don't think it's a big deal, but I think white starts to get just a little bit of counterplay. This knight gets a little more active. Okay, nothing totally earth-shattering, but black, of course, he's a grandmaster, and he's going to play the most precise moves here, or at least the most precise move in this particular position. You see, being a grandmaster is not a guarantee of always playing good moves, but in this case, he does. And he plays bishop to d5. Now, what's the idea here? And we'll see, basically, he's threatening to fork the king and this pawn here. Okay, so just as a side note, if white were to try to block that or defend against that, then we can win a pawn potentially here. Okay, with bishop takes, and then taking here. I don't know if that's necessarily the best move. And then we still have some. We'd be a pawn up. Bishops of opposite color could be a little drawish, but obviously you'd rather be black in this position than white. Okay, but that didn't happen in the game. Let's go back. Instead, white plays c takes b6. And again, black can take back here, but he's going to go ahead and play bishop to c4 check here. And this is actually, again, the most precise way to do this, because if we were instead to take here, a takes b6, and then if we wanted to, which I don't know if this would be the best way to do it, but we can now block that type of maneuver, or we can block here the check, okay, or even something like knight to c1, and then if bishop to c4 check, then bishop to d3 protects this pawn. So taking the pawn right away on b6 is not the best move. Instead, black plays bishop to c4 check first, and after king to g1, now he takes back a takes b6. Okay, the knight to c1 happens with the idea maybe of playing bishop to d3 if he's given time, but of course we're just going to take that pawn. And now the positional advantage of the two bishop is now also a material advantage of a pawn. Okay, bishop to d3. Okay, bishop to c6. I think if we take here, that this is still very good, and black can probably win this game, but I think again, Grivas, with this advantage of the two bishops, is even saying that his light square bishop, is better than the white light square bishop, so he's going to keep it. Okay, knight to e2, attacking the bishop, and then bishop to e5. Can we see here that how this bishop is totally dominating this knight? So the knight can't go to these squares, and if he ever goes to this square, like this, then we'll just take, and then maybe something like that. And we can see here that this is going to be, this is already very bad for white. Okay. So white instead, again, tries to activate this king. And then h4 happens. Of course, if we take on h4, then the bishop will take on h2. And then this pawn will be fairly easy to pick off in a little bit. Okay. So instead, he keeps the king going here. And now, instead of taking on g3, black just locks off this position here. Okay, so not a big deal, not really too big of a threat, but if you can imagine this knight coming off the board and then this advance of this pawn, black even has some minor future potential threats of sacking on g3 to get this pawn home, but obviously that's not the case here in this position right now. King to d2, and then bishop to d6. And I think here simply, remember, this pawn cannot advance. This pawn will be lost if it tries to advance. So black just plans on bringing his bishop to, I think, to c5. So I think that's the main thing right there. And then king to e1, going back to defend, and then king to f6, and then I think white resigns here, realizing that it's only a matter of time until these pawns start advancing after black has improved his king's position. All the while, white's knight will never be able to get into the game here. So, anyways, very nice demonstration of the power of the two bishops in the endgame and late middle game, as well as a great examples of gaining time by making threats and gaining tempos. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please press the like button. And if you are not already a subscriber, please consider becoming one. Let me know what you thought of this video and what other topics or games you'd like to see me analyze and comment on this channel. Have a great day, and I wish you the best of luck with your chess.